sharp. So good morning, everyone, and welcome to our breakout session on the vision for adapted crops and soils, advancing the VACS global movement. My name is Daniela Vega, and I work as Chief of Staff to the Director General at CIMMYT, and I also act as the Interim Executive Secretary for the VACS FAO CGIAR CIMMYT partnership. And I'm delighted to see many of you here this morning. In the next 45 minutes, we'll explore groundbreaking work being done through the VACS initiative through the community of practice. Our format today is meant to be dynamic, so we will begin with some opening insights, followed by a keynote address, and then move into 6 impactful TED-style presentations from our working groups. We will then close with reflections on our path forward. So to begin our session, I'm pleased to introduce Máximo Torero, Chief Economist of the Food and Agriculture Organization of the United Nations, on behalf of Dr. Xu Dongyu, Director General of the FAO. Máximo will provide opening remarks that will portray the relevance of the VACS movement. Máximo, welcome to the stage.
Thank you, and it's a pleasure to be here, and I will be reading because I am speaking on behalf of the Director General of FAO. So first, let me extend my heartfelt congratulations to Dr. Fowler and Jeffrey Houghton for his World Food Prize. It's an honor on behalf of FAO Director General to warmly welcome you all to this breakout session of the vision of adapted crops and soils advancing the global movement. 2 years ago, FAO was thrilled when Dr. Cary Fowler approached us with the idea of creating a global vision with partners to develop resilient agri-food systems based on diverse, nutritious, and climate-adapted crops grown in healthy and fertile soils. So remember, nutrition, climate resilient, and healthy, fertile soils, 3 core components of VACS. This was originally launched by the US Department of State, the African Union, and FAO. VACS Vision for Adapted Crop Soils aimed to enhance agricultural productivity and nutrition by promoting access to these diverse, climate-resilient crop varieties grown in healthy soils. VACS provides a unified framework for investments to achieve these goals, and FAO involvement in VACS aligns directly with the strategic framework of FAO, the 2022-31 framework, addressing nutrition, climate change, and soil engagement. It also offers FAO member nations and development partners, particularly in Africa, an innovative approach to transforming agri-food systems and achieving the Sustainable Development Goals. By collaborating with the CGIAR and CIMMYT, which is our joint partnership, we combine our strengths to advance the global VACS vision, expanding its impact across a wide range of public and private stakeholders. These partnerships brings together all our comparative advantages, and Dr. Fowler always overstates this because it's extremely important. It's, I think, historically, the first time that we really formally work together to try to push an initiative. Colleagues, investing in agriculture, research innovation, and enhancing policies is crucial. Technology and smart policies drive productivity growth and are essential for transitioning to sustainable food systems. However, our over-reliance on a few staple crops make us vulnerable, especially as extreme weather and land degradation threaten food security. VACS addresses this by promoting indigenous and traditional food crops, or what we call now opportunity crops. These crops, though underfunded in research, are highly nutritious, adapted to local conditions, and often grown by women, contributing to both households and nutrition. Under VACS, we aim to accelerate plant breeding, enhance value chains, and increase consumer demand for these opportunity crops, ultimately leading to more diverse diets and better nutrition outcomes. But to fully succeed, we must also address soil health. Reversing soil degradation through invoked knowledge and sustainable practices is essential for increased efficiency and resilience of crops systems in the face of climate change. VACS embodies the 4 pillars of FAO strategic framework: better production, better nutrition, better environment, and better life for all. Together, we will achieve more productive crops, improve nutrition, reduce land degradation, and greater climate resilience and lower greenhouse gas emissions. Allow me just briefly to talk of some of the milestones that we have accomplished. First, in July, we signed the MOU, FAO, CIR, CIMMYT. We signed this MOU of understanding to coordinate and strengthen the VACS movement, and today's event is supported by this partnership. We have developed a VACS theory of change along partners such as CIMMYT, IFAD, and the Crop Trust, and many other partners together. GAIN is also here present today, and many other partners. This outlines the necessary actions to build resilient agri-food systems and healthy diets through targeted work on soils, seeds policies, and market development. We have compiled nutrient data and contributed to crop climate modeling to identify promising opportunity crops in 5 regions of Africa. With support from the United States and Japan, FAO is implementing the Soil Mapping Resilient Agri-Food System, the Soil Fair Initiative, in 7 countries, focusing on building comprehensive national soil information systems to guide policy, field-level soil management. And we are working on enabling policies on how to create the demand needed for these crops. It's not just producing more, but it's also having the demand so that this continues to be a sustainable activity. VACS offers an impactful framework for action and impact. Even last week, the G7 development ministers expressed support for VACS, committing to international collaboration to promote diverse nutrition crops, sustainable soil use, and plant genetic resource conservation. We are now ready to unite our efforts to enhance production, demand, and enabling factors in each country, making the vision of resilient agri-food systems based on climate-adapted crops a reality. It is my great privilege to open this event, and I extend my deep thanks to VACS Community of Practice and the working group chairs whose expertise has enriched today's discussion. Your voluntary participation reflects a widespread belief in this VACS vision. I speak on behalf of all VACS implementers when I say that we are excited to be here today to learn from your insights and to make this vision a reality. Dear colleagues, let's work together for good food for all for today and tomorrow. Thank you so much.
Maximo, for those remarks. I'm now honored to introduce Dr. Carrie Fowler, the U.S. Special Envoy for Global Food Security, 2024 World Food Prize laureate, and the architect of the VACS movement for a keynote address. Dr. Fowler, welcome to the stage.
Thank you, and good morning. It's kind of early, isn't it, for this? I'd like to just offer a few thoughts, some thoughts that I try to myself to keep in mind and that may help you in the months ahead about VACS. I don't want to go into the details. I think most of you have the basics down about what we're trying to accomplish with crops and soils. So here are a few things that I try to think about. When VACS was launched almost 2 years ago, we said that our goal was not to promote a project or two. Our goal was actually to change the conversation about agricultural development. It was to insert crops and soils into that conversation and to broaden it to include the full range of crops, not just a couple. And to change that conversation really requires a movement. It's not about projects and project funding and this and that. It's really about changing the conversation and being a movement. And for it to be a movement, it requires that ownership be dispersed. So from the very beginning, I think the very first time we stood on a stage and said we want to launch this with FAO and the African Union, we said the United States does not own this. We're just a catalyst for starting it. We don't own it. We don't control it. We're not the gatekeeper. We haven't copyrighted it. It's for everyone that wants to pick it up. Where that's gone, and I think you'll talk about it in the rest of the session, Danielle alluded to it, is one of the elements, one of the instruments we've got for that is a community of practice. And I'll remember the first time when my staff came to me and said, well, we're going to have a community of practice meeting. And I thought, well, what's that going to be like? And they said, yeah, we have some people signed up to be on the internet for this discussion. And I thought in my head, well, there must be about 30 people. That was the number that quickly flashed in my head. It was more than 300. And then for the second meeting, I was told that we had broken the system because the system could only register 1,000. And we had had more than 1,000 people try to register. So obviously we've touched a chord there, and that's exactly what we wanted to happen, to have dispersed ownership and leadership and for everyone to be involved. The other thing that I hope you'll keep in mind is that if this whole movement, if you will, is to succeed, it has to have nutrition at the center of it. I'm trying to train myself to say that we're working for nutrition security as much or more often as I say food security, and sometimes I say food and nutrition security, but I think the words matter. They matter because if we think about nutrition security, we think about food security in a different way. We think about it more holistically and what the ultimate outcome really needs to be, which is the health of people, and that's the kind of food system we want to have. And I think nutritional indicators in a food system they are really the indicators of the success or the failure of a food system. We're not about trying to say that indigenous and traditional crops should replace current staple crops, current major crops, but we do think that we should be looking at all of our options in the future and providing those options to farmers and then, of course, to consumers. Two more points I'll make real quickly. One is that I think we all, as we do our individual work, ought to be thinking about the long term, not just the short term. And I know that's hard to do because we all come from institutions and we apply for grants and we try to get money for a project. That's great. But those projects have to be considered in the context of where our longer term vision is going to take us. So if we're going to have a 3-year project, let's also be thinking about how that gets us towards the goal of 20 or 30 or 50 years from now. At least that's the way I kind of think about it. And the final thing I want to say is that just as putting nutrition in the center of what we do is critical, and just as spreading the ownership out is critical, I think also putting women at the center is critical. We have to involve women in everything we do, and part of the real, I guess, emotional support I get from trying to promote VACS is the knowledge that so many of these crops that we're promoting are in fact tended by women, and I think that's a way to change society as well. It's certainly a way to change nutrition and health outcomes for children. So I'm not sure, Danielle, if that's what you expected me to say, but I'm going to say that my time is up now. It's back to you.
That was perfect. Thank you so much, Dr. Fowler. Thank you for those remarks. And now, to start sharing the collaborative work of these 6 VACS Community of Practice working groups, I am pleased to introduce Martin van Sonneveld, Head of the Genetic Resources at World VACS, who will discuss the first topic, improving access to nutritious opportunity crop priorities, on behalf of the Community of Practice working group led by the World VACS and Crop Trust. Welcome.
Thank you, Daniela, Gary, Maximo. Good morning. Thank you. So let me start with an experience. 2 years ago, I met with David Soginu, a farmer in Benin, who participates in a program to evaluate amaranth varieties developed by World Vegetable Center and others. So we went to his fields. We went afterwards to his home, and he showed me a little bottle with amaranth seeds, and he told me, this is selected from the best plants, and I'm keeping them to grow more amaranth in the next growing season for my family and to sell at the weekly market. So that is just a small example of one farmer family incorporating nutritious crops in his farming system to make food systems more resilient locally. However, by the way, perhaps you're not familiar with amaranth, but it's very tasteful. It's produced as a leafy green for its nutritious grains, and it's adapted to harsh climates. But despite its popularity across the globe, it's still underutilized. It doesn't nourish the number of people that it could or should. And one of the principal reasons, not the only one, but one of the key reasons is that there's limited access to improved varieties. And so this prevents farmers from growing more of these opportunity crops. So in order to convert these, let's say, neglected and underutilized species into opportunity crops, we need to provide farmers with varieties that suit their needs. However, current policies make it difficult to develop varieties of opportunity crops, make it difficult for farmers to access the seeds, and basically make it difficult to scale for impact. So today, on behalf of an expert working group led by the World Vegetable Center and the Crop Trust, I will present 3 policy options, let's say policy actions, to support farmers like David to grow more opportunity crops. So first, the first action is that we must make crop diversity digestible for policymakers, make it manageable for people to understand, because there are more than 7,000 food plans globally, and as much as we would like to work with all of them, we need to focus, correct? So which climate resilient and nutritious crops should we promote? And how can governments include them in policies and regulations? So the vision for adapted crops and soils shows how this can be done. And through stakeholder consultation last year, a list of 63 crops was identified that can guide African governments to expand their crop basket and nourish a next generation. So these opportunity crops, they must be included in conservation strategies. It starts with saving the seed, isn't it? Seed catalogs, so that people can start developing and registering varieties, food composition tables, school meals, and other interventions to really make this food system transformation happen. And there are more opportunity crops at country level and in other regions. Weighting. So we need a global task force to support and guide governments to make smart and fast decisions on which crops to promote and what kind of strategic investments to make. So the second policy action is that we must make crop diversity available for researchers and breeders. And okay, the FAO Plant Treaty Annex 1 list, I'm just looking here in the room, it may not be known to everyone, it's not that familiar, but it's key for what ends up on your plate. It regulates plant genetic resources for food and agriculture, the seeds kept by farmers in gene banks, that is the basis to develop new varieties for changing climates and changing palates. And countries interdepend on these genetic resources. Without sharing, breeding programs and networks such as the Africa Plant Breeding Association cannot develop new varieties. The good news is that more than 115 countries have accepted to share genetic resources of 35 food crops, 29 forages. The bad news is that most of the crops prioritized during VACS, the 63, are not on this list, and countries don't know really how to share them. So this is a major barrier in variety development, so it's key to add opportunity crops to the Annex 1 list of the FAO Plant Treaty to develop new varieties. The third one is that we must make crop diversity accessible for farmers, especially women. This means ensuring seed systems reach farmers. And this is a challenge, especially for women, to reach women, because they may face barriers in purchasing seed, accessing information, while they are the ones that mostly grow opportunity crops. So one promising solution is to support local women seed businesses to produce and deliver improved varieties, because public seed sector and most seed companies are not interested yet. So these women seed businesses, they are the start-ups to strengthen seed system further, and government should support them by enabling declaring quality seeds of locally produced seed and connect them to networks of farmers, breeders, and gene banks. To wrap up, the diversity of opportunity crop must be digestible for policymakers, it must be available for researchers and breeders through the FAO Plant Treaty Annex 1 list, and it must be accessible to farmers, especially women, through better and more diverse seed systems, starting with supporting women seed businesses. These 3 policy actions will help women and men farmers like David in Benin to access quality seeds of improved varieties that nourish his family, all of us, in a rapidly warming world. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Martin, for making us understand that VACS needs to become digestible, available, and accessible. Next, I am pleased to reintroduce Maximo Torero, Chief Economist at FAO, who will discuss the next topic on increasing demand for opportunity crop products on behalf of this Community of Practice Working Group led by FAO. Maximo, welcome.
Thank you, and sorry you have to hear me again. So one of the things that for us is extremely important under the VACS initiative is how we not only focus on the production side, but also on the productivity side of these crops, but also on the demand side. And that is the core, because if the demand is not ready, then when we start to supply more, of course, price will fall, and farmers will be unhappy, and then we have problems. So the goal is how we can create demand for these opportunity crops. Now, why is this so important? We need to make a little bit of a parallel with the Green Revolution, where we increased productivity in rice and wheat substantially, but the demand was already there. People were used to these commodities, and there was an excess need of supply. So it resolved a problem and a gap of demand that allowed these people to be able to, of course, move out of hunger and move quickly. In our case today, despite still we have 733 million people which are in hunger, it's more complex to assume that that demand will be there, because these are crops that normally people won't know too much. And what we want to avoid is a problem like the one we have with quinoa in the case of Bolivia, Peru, especially in my country. So we had a huge improvement in terms of supply and demand, in terms of demand. In the contrary, there was a huge increase in the demand of this commodity, and the supply side was not ready. And what happened is that a community that used to use this as a staple crop, the crop became very expensive. So here is the reverse. We're going to do significant investments in supply, but we need to be sure that demand is there. And why? Because we need to guarantee that people will consume this new supply that we will be creating through this VACS initiative. Now, why the demand is so important? Because one of the elements and the theory of change behind the VACS initiative is to improve nutrition. And to improve nutrition implies that we have access to healthy diets. And to be truly healthy, our diets must meet several criteria. And there is a joint statement that just came out between FAO and WHO. They should be adequate in nutrients, diverse across food groups, balanced in energy, moderate in unhealthy food consumption, and all foods must be safe. And that's part of the job, and a big part of the job that we are trying to do is to create these commodities that comply with these conditions, but also assure that the consumer side will shift their dietary patterns to a healthier, more sustainable options in no small task. Now, one additional advantage we have is that we know that these crops are climate resilient. And therefore, that's an additional plus, that we are not putting and imposing something to the consumers, but we are already pre-selecting crops that resolve this problem. So how we can do this, how we can build this demand. And that's not an easy issue to create a demand of a commodity. Normally, it's better to have the demand there and then create the supply and respond to a demand. That's what iPhone did and many of the Apple products did. But here we have to work intensively with the private sector. That will be essential, to bring together with the private sector so that they can also have interest in integrating these crops to their procurement of what they do and the value-added products that they have. That's one component. We also need to change consumer behavior, and we need to bring these crops to create this consumer behavior, similar to what has happened with other commodities already in the world, like the one I mentioned in the case of quinoa, but there are many others that today are being used more because chefs start to create this movement of using local foods and of using this type of products which are very nutritious. My country has a huge experience on that. Peru always used to have amazing food, but since the last 10 years, there have been a completely change on behavior on the consumer side because of an impulse done by chefs, which helped to create a huge behavioral change in terms of consumption in Peru and to bring up this type of commodities that before were not well known and not so well used. Now it's a pleasure to see, that, like for example, potatoes is another example. We have 3,700 varieties of potato. 20, 30 years ago, the problem was that potato chips were not being able to use these varieties of potatoes because they were not uniform and they need homogeneity. Now, the variety and the diversity of these products is what has value. So we have changed completely the behavior and the use and creating a different demand. We don't care today if the potatoes are different sizes, different colors. That's what people are buying for. and they are paying more for that type of a product that we are developing. So I think we need to find the way to attract and to create attractive markets and innovation to bring these products into the markets. And also, the other way to do it is to work with government procurement. And why I'm referring to this? Because one of the major coalitions, for example, the most successful coalitions of the Food System Summit is the school feeding programs. And school feeding programs today are going to reach over 400 million children globally. And we want these kids to have nutritious food. We want them to have, when they go to school and they eat in the school, that they have not only basic core staples, but also to have diversity and nutritious products. And here is where there is another opportunity that this crop can create its own demand through these government procurement systems, so that we can have school meals that will have this type of content. So public procurement represents an important opportunity to create this institutional demand and potentially influence future consumers. So again, we need to bring private sector, we need to bring private procurement, but we also need to bring behavioral change through different actors of change. Let me just give you an example. Chief Fatima Binta is a passionate advocate for fonio, an ancient grain that thrives in dry conditions. And this nutrient-rich crop, traditionally cultivated by women in Ghana, has often been underestimated despite its main benefits. So Chief Fatima Binta and FAO have launched a project in Ghana to support women fonio producers, showcasing how cultivating this grain can improve nutrition, empower communities, and promote sustainable practices, and at the same time, of course, empowering women. So together, I think we can bring and build up this type of change that we're looking for, but move in parallel so that we don't have the problem of an excess of supply or, of course, of an excess in demand. So in conclusion, let us not fall in the gap of assuming that production alone will lead the consumption. Without enhancing consumer business and government understanding of the value of opportunity crops, there will be no increase in demand. That said, the potential is huge. As witness for other opportunity crops, quinoa, amaranth, and spirulina, this is a vital opportunity to ensure the sustainability of our agri-food system. So let's work together on the supply side and the demand side to achieve this goal. Thank you.
Thank you, Maximo, for strengthening the demand creation side of VACS and also reminding us of lessons learned in this regard. Now I'm pleased to introduce Lawrence Haddad, Executive Director of GAIN and 2018 World Food Prize laureate, who will discuss the next topic on creating value chains to enhance sales and consumption of opportunity crops on behalf of this Community of Practice Working Group led by GAIN and the World Business Council for Sustainable Development. Thank you.
Thank you. It's great to be here. Carrie, congratulations again. So we were asked to do a sort of TED-style talk here, so forgive any rhetorical flourishes that I may introduce into this. Please be gentle with me. So first of all, imagine yourself at a crime scene. Why do I say crime scene? Because really it's a crime. It's taken us so long to get to this point in time. And thank you, Carrie, for kickstarting this movement. But the second reason to think of a crime scene is think of two detectives scratching their heads, rubbing their chins, thinking, what were the motives? What were the means? And what's the opportunity for this heinous act? And I'm using this means, motive, and opportunity because I love the way that the framing for the crops is around the opportunity for these crops. But without the motive and the means, this now very positive act is not going to be materialized. So what are the motives and what are the means for getting the opportunity crops into the mouths of people who need it the most? So Maximo has touched a lot on the demand side, and that's really the motivation. Farmers will only be motivated to produce the crops if there is some kind of motivation from consumers and from public procurement to purchase these crops. And it's a big job to do this. I think we don't want to underestimate the job. I was in visiting the GAIN office in Tanzania, and we were doing a project that was trying to stimulate the production of new healthy foods, the innovation around new healthy foods. And we were walking around the fields, and I was seeing lots of green leafy vegetables everywhere. And I was saying, what about these? You know, these are everywhere. They're obviously very at one with the ecosystem. They're edible, right? And they're green leafy vegetables, so they must be nutritious. And my team and some of the partners we were working with just kind of laughed at me and said, our grandparents used to eat this, but now we just give it to goats. So I think this is the kind of challenge, maybe that's an extreme version of the challenge, but these crops are neglected for a reason. So we're going to have to revalorize them and somehow make them more exciting. And I think there are lots of ways of doing that, and Maximo outlined a few of them. Again, we try very hard to combine left brain and right brain approaches. Left brain approaches being, here's the science, here's the nutrition profile, here's the climate resilience, yes, that's good. But you have to, and the private sector is brilliant at this in good and bad ways, about making us buy things we don't want or didn't even think we needed and certainly probably don't need. They use emotion. They use emotion and aspiration. So we have to somehow blend both of those things in. Good example of that is a GAIN program we did in Kenya, trying to get healthy foods to be more, to be seen differently, to change the conversation, as Carrie would say. And so we didn't say anything about the nutrition of the food. We just developed a campaign with the Kenyan partners, with deep consumer insight research, and we concluded that Kenyans are really very influenced by accomplished people, and they want their kids to become accomplished people. They want them to become musicians and sports people and leaders and lawyers and doctors and teachers. And so we got together some of the leading folks in those professions, and we talked to them about the foods they ate when they were kids, and we developed a campaign that said, it was a picture of the person, and it was a picture of the foods they ate as a kid, and it was just entitled, "These Foods Made Me." So nothing about health, nothing about nutrition, but it's an example of tapping into emotions, being where the consumer is, and then bringing your thing to the consumer. But I really wanted to talk mostly about the means of the value chains, connecting the consumer to the producer. And if I was a value chain stakeholder, I'm going to want to know a bunch of things before I take these opportunity crops seriously. I'm going to want to know, can I get enough of them? We did a lot of work on biofortified crops with Harvest Plus. One of the big stumbling blocks was not being able to get enough seed for biofortified crops. There was demand, but we couldn't get the supply response, as Maximo said. So the off-takers need to know there's enough supply. They also need to know how dispersed the supply is. Am I going to have to do a lot of aggregation of this supply? And if so, how am I going to do that? The processors, another stakeholder in the value chain, they're going to want to know, what are the processing properties of these crops? What's the storage properties of these crops? What's the transport properties of these crops? Am I going to lose half these crops from farm gate to market because they're so perishable? On the demand side, I'm going to want to know what's the selling point? What's the selling point of this crop? Are we selling it on environment? Are we selling it on nutrition? Or are we selling it on something else? And each crop in each context will have a different selling point. So we need to have consumer insight, and we need to know what drives consumers to consume products that are the closest substitutes of the new products. We need to be really smart about the markets. So we need to know all of this stuff. And I think if we can get that right, then we've got the means as well as the motive, as well as the opportunity. So my three takeaway messages really are, first of all, the R&D doesn't stop after the production of the crops. You need to do a lot of R&D on the food safety, the processing properties, the organoleptic properties of this, and you just need to keep going with the R&D. Don't stop. Second takeaway message is everyone needs to be aligned. the producers, the value chain operators, stakeholders, the consumers, the procurement people. It's not called a chain for nothing. If one of the links breaks, everything breaks down. So you need to get all these stakeholders as aligned as possible. And the third point is I think governments have a really big role to play in creating an enabling environment that makes all that alignment happen. Governments must see this as a big opportunity as well. They can't just come into this sort of like, oh, here's another thing that it might yield some value for us, it might be good for us. We've got to really get them excited about the value, about these new crops. If we can do all of that, means motive and opportunity, I think we will avoid the crime of producing these crops and no one consuming them. I believe working together we can do that. Thanks.
Thank you, Lawrence, for that call to remind us all that we, working together, are stronger. Now I'm pleased to introduce Mary Booth, Chief Executive Officer at the Global Farmer Network and 2024 Top Agri-Food Pioneer from the World Food Prize, to discuss the next topic, empowering farmers and governments for sustainable land use and food production, on behalf of this Community of Practice Working Group, led by the World Wildlife Fund and the Global Farmer Network.
And good morning. And I will say this is quiet because I actually started my day opening up the Global Youth Institute, and there's a lot of energy in that room right now, so we have to bring ours up as well. We need to be bold enough to demand action at the global scale and humble enough to acknowledge that local initiatives can be transformative and life-changing. That line captured my attention from a book I recently read. It's called The New Breadline by Jean-Martin Bauer. Susie Friedman with the World Wildlife Fund and I were invited to co-lead a group focused on how best to catalyze action that would empower, enable producers and policymakers to collaborate, to protect land, to support the restoration of degraded land, to encourage sustainable land management that promotes and supports the nutritious production of food. Numerous studies and experiences have documented factors that challenge the adoption of sustainable land management, including lack of land tenure or ownership, limited or lack of access to technologies, lack of access to relevant information, or even extension services. There is some good news. Agriculture and those who actually farm the land have a tremendous opportunity to be a leading catalyst in restoring and managing the land for a positive future. But we must do more now, and we have to help support and speed up that progress. So I'm going to encourage you to read the paper. You can get all the details there. My opportunity this morning is to actually encourage, to share several of the challenges that are experienced by farmers who are actually working in this space. Highlight some of the innovative and the actions and the recommendations that they're making, and share with you their priorities for how we bring degraded land back to life, and so it can produce the nutritious food that we all want for our families and for our communities. Priority 1, shift how we finance sustainable land management and food production in vulnerable areas. Rechannel appropriate resources directly to farmers through producer organizations and cooperatives, because they work directly with the farmers. Quoting Dr. Borlaug, and we've done this all week long, take it to the farmer. In the Philippines, and I'm going to read this because this is in his voice, A.D. Alvarez is trained as a minister, and he has a background in microfinance. He's raising corn, squash, and eggplant on his own 8-hectare farm in Cebu, Philippines. In his words, policies and finance flows have stifled adoption of sustainable land use measures such as conservation agriculture, including no-till. The average farmer in the Philippines owns 1 hectare, and government support is not available to farmers with more than 3 hectares, preventing even mid-sized farmers from accessing financing that would support ongoing innovation and sustainable land management. One example that he shared is the direct seeded ricer, which can be done with the 2-row direct seeder that does not require fuel, literally reducing cost and environmental impact. There is a need for microfinancing that would flow directly to farmers in appropriate sized loans and grants, enabling farmers to actually own or access that technology. That direct seed ricer that he was talking about is $900 US dollars. That's a small scale for a bank or a finance entity, but that amount of funding is amazingly significant for many farmers. Bridging this gap is essential for conservation agriculture adoption and sustainable land management success. Priority 2, prioritize and support peer-to-peer networking and knowledge transfer by increasing investment in ag programming, supporting extension services, and the producer networks for sustainable land management. In India, Shekhar Baldsfeld has been a pioneer for applied research and a farmer. He brings the knowledge to scale adoption of the Saguna regenerative technique, SRT. It's built on the broader concept of conservation agriculture, some no-till involved in it, but it is tailored specifically for the local concept. In his words, one of the goals of my farm is to restore dignity to agriculture. Implementing SRT on my farm for rice cultivation since 2011. I have doubled productivity. I've delivered at the same time dramatic benefits for water infiltration, subsoil water recharge, carbon sequestration, and overall soil health improvements, while eliminating the drudgery that is traditional paddy rice farming, much of that done by women. SRT is valuable for other crops, including cotton, soybeans, pulses, vegetables, corn, millets, and more. In 2019, an officer for the World Bank's Project on Climate Resilient Agriculture brought growers from some drought-prone districts in India to his farm. Despite early skepticism by some, one brave cotton farmer took a chance on the technique, and he achieved excellent results. By 2021, 300 had adopted it, then 1,000, and today over 7,000 farmers in India have adopted the SRT method. Farmer-to-farmer knowledge sharing through YouTube, webinars, word of mouth, university support, and on-field demonstrations and workshops where practical results are visible are crucial to all of this. His main point was all of this sustainable land use take-up did not require significant financing. It is knowledge intensive rather than resource intensive. And in Brazil, Abilio Pacheco is using agriculture protection system called ICLF, Integrated Crop Livestock Forestry, to grow crops, raise livestock, and engage in forestry all at once. He said, I was impressed by the science behind ICLF, and the results are outstanding. My crops, cattle, and trees produce more. ICLF is all about rejuvenation and sustainability. It's helping us repair land and that has lost its productive capacity. Knowledge transfer that is supported and shared by private and public research directly to farmers can be quantified, but with a reminder, there is no single solution. Everything requires a local response. It starts with information. For the Global Farmer Network, what do we do and how do we move this from a white paper to catalyst for action? It's do more webinars, connect farmers together, we've been doing actually webinars on no-till, efficient water management, seed technology, business and resource management for 3 years. We're going to be expanding that. Each of these webinars has been led by a farmer like Edie Alvarez, Shekhar Baldsfeld, Abilio Pacheco, who has specific expertise on the ground and a passion to share this information. In conclusion, we need to be bold enough to demand action at the global scale, humble enough to acknowledge that local initiatives can be transformative and life-changing, and may I add, land-changing as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Mary, for always reminding us to keep the farmers first and to keep sharing the knowledge. And on that note, I am pleased to introduce Inocencia John, economist at the Department of Agriculture, Economics and Business at the University of Dar es Salaam in Tanzania, and 2024 Top Agri-Food Pioneer as well from the World Food Prize. Inocencia, welcome. She will be introducing the topic, integrating comprehensive soil management practices into agricultural programming on behalf of this Community of Practice Working Group led by CIMMYT and the University of Zambia.
Thank you, Daniela. We have had a great discussion on different issues, and now I'm going to talk about soils. And soils are important, and it's because achieving global food security, soils actually play a very critical role. So we need to actually make sure that we are very secure with the soils that we have. And this is because increasingly it has been acknowledged that soil health is actually a very important aspect, especially in providing different ecosystem services like climate resilience, water regulation, and food production in a very sustainable manner. But however, there are declining effects of soils, especially in Africa and in the world. In particular, it has been estimated that 25% of the agricultural soils have actually been depleted, making them very highly degraded, impacting agricultural productivity. And 50% to 70% of those soils, especially in Africa, have actually been depleted from physical, chemical, and different biological limitations, making crop production a huge problem. So this is all combined with extreme and uncertain erratic climatic conditions, imperfect access to seeds and fertilizers, and as well as the dynamics in the markets. So coping with soil degradation requires a huge attention given to soils. But what are those underlying factors? And realizing that soil health is actually an important aspect, especially for Africa. What is it that we actually need to do? We urgently need to do, but it's yet hard to achieve. And it's hard to achieve because we have extreme heterogeneity in terms of the soils that are actually very available. And managing the soils itself is also an issue. The fact that the solutions actually vary by geolocation, by the socioeconomic and the market context, and time is an important issue. The process is slow, and the solutions also require that we have sustained investment in knowledge, intensive, and local adaptation. So what does the paper envision? What are those proposed solutions that we have in hand in the fact that what is it that we need to do? First of all, let's promote some of these novel methods for enhancing soil health by targeting some of those sweet spots. So let's target those sweet spots where the soils have been conserved, they are better to use, and promote sustainably agricultural intensification. Let's prioritize some of these opportunity crops. And opportunity crops, I have them to heart. I've worked with opportunity crops a lot. And one of the key things we managed to do, for instance, in the case of Tanzania, is try to understand those different geolocation and understand what grows best where and what soils support production of these different crops. And looking at all those different factors, like especially the climatic factors, what can we do best to actually make sure that we actually conserve the soils there using these different opportunity costs, so we can actually be able to manage the soils and being able to have to grow the crops in a more sustainable and suitable manner. So using these opportunity crops, it will kind of create awareness into understanding that we are now soil aware and trying to be able to understand that let's use these opportunity crops as a management factor for improving soils for these different specific locations. What is the other thing that we can do is that we can have country-specific extension campaigns that actually help to improve soil health by linking agricultural incentives to soil health and using some of these innovative approaches that can actually help promote farmer learning, like ICTs. And this can actually help to bring a strong linkages between the researchers, extension officers, and farmers. In a way, we can go a mile away trying to make sure that we actually reach that particular farmer. And lastly, create some geo-targeted analytics for profitable investments, trying to use the space that's available in the different approaches, linking global soil data with the local data that's actually available, using those available handheld devices, and using the correct metrics, monitoring soil health, like soil carbon, pH, providing equitable targeted data that can actually be used for these marginalized groups. So in conclusion, using from those 4 approaches that I've mentioned, they're actually in line with the Nairobi Declaration for the African Fertilizer and Soil Health Summit. And this is into enhancing both food and nutrition security, strategically guiding private sector investments to support geo-targeted sustainable soil management, and we can then in turn promote the health and resilience of both degraded and healthy soils while maintaining a balanced ecosystem. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Innocencia, for making us soil aware this morning. Now I'm pleased to introduce Dilehun Amede, Director of Climate Adaptation, Sustainable Agriculture and Resilience at AGRA, who will discuss the last topic, which is regional focus on Africa, on behalf of this Community of Practice Working Group led by FARA, the Forum for Agricultural Research in Africa, and AGRA. Welcome.
Thank you very much. Good morning, colleagues. A lot has been said. So what's remaining for me? When it comes to Africa, we are encountered by multiple challenges that are interlinked to each other. Food security, nutrition, climate risks, resource degradation. And those are the challenges, plus insecurity and conflict. But on the other side, most of what we call security opportunity crops are indigenous to Africa. You see a genetic diversity in the continent. If you call sorghum, millets, teff, fonio, all these crops, chickpeas, are still traditionally managed by communities in Africa. In fact, if it was not for the communities, these crops could have been vanished long ago. And that is the opportunity. But then again, farmers are, threatened because, for one, they don't get the return per investment. The dominant crops, which are supported by all of us, research, policymakers, development partners, for the big 3, are overtaking, the land, the opportunity of these crops. Like sorghum, shrinking, millets are shrinking. And the implication of that is that farmers are then exposed to another challenge, which is pest. When the land is shrinking and the amount of grain of the sorghum, millets in the field is getting less and less, then it became prone to birds. And some of the birds, what we call quella in Africa, particularly in the Rift Valley, they make 100% loss, 100% loss. So farmers then have another challenge that is really not yet recognized by all of us, but we are still constrained by those factors. Now, so the VACS initiative is timely for Africa. It's timely for Africa because it aligns with the CAADP priorities, which is about sustainable and resilient agri-food systems. And among the major priorities of CAADP is really food security, nutrition, and climate change adaptation. But also the components of CAADP, which is about really food security. These crops still in Africa, particularly in West Africa, in the drought-prone Africa, they are feeding communities in the most challenging environments. Up to 60% of food in the Sahel comes from these crops. But then also, if you analyze the nutritional content, these are nutrient-dense crops. If you analyze peel millet, for example, and compared to the conventional crops like wheat, you get 3 to 4 times more calcium, zinc, iron in these grains. And those are, in plant physiology, you call them osmolytes. Those are the ones which are helping the plant to stand droughts and extreme weather conditions. They also serve as, sources of livestock feed, particularly in the crop livestock system. And that's where really, when challenges in the pastoral, in the rangeland is tough, then they rely on crop residue. So what should be changing? What has to happen, on the ground? For one, probably we're the least in terms of influence. The governments of the respective countries have to acknowledge the benefit, the role of these crops, so that they skew the investments from the 3 big dominant crops to include some of these crops we mentioned. So really, the bias towards political crops. Maize is a political crop. Wheat is a political crop. Rice is a political crop. And that's where really most of the investments are going. But also the policy environment overcomes these institutional and market failures, which limits the demand, but also the market opportunities. And the bias created in the urban areas is also a big challenge. But again, I mentioned about communities. For example, in the Sahel, we heard about a story of a Burkinabe farmer, Mr. Yakubu Soadogo, who really developed a soil water management strategy called ZIPID, along with best varieties, and ensure that these crops are surviving, not only surviving, producing at least 2-ton agriculture, and make sure that communities are benefiting out of them. So productivity enhancing solutions are still critical, and they are critical if really support farmer innovations on the ground. The second thing I would like to emphasize is really the market. Market is the most binding constraint. These crops are struggling to gain significant market traction, even within our own countries, in the urban settings, let alone the international markets. So how do we expand the existing domestic markets? By creating awareness and campaigns, targeted campaigns, but also create new market opportunities by linking farmers with SMEs, with mega processors, and also investing in market infrastructure, including storage facilities, transport networks, and incentives for the private sector, particularly the taxation system, and strengthening the institutions that are supporting these crops, particularly those which are supporting women. We have examples, for example, in East Africa, where breweries like Diageo started to use sorghum as a cheaper alternative to produce beer. And then government started to reduce tax even up to 75%. This is something we really need to promote and encourage governments to do. Value addition is another, up to now it's food. It's food for the poor. And we are saying these are nutrient dense, these are climate resilient. So how do you really enhance the product diversification, product development, but also having a branding and certification approach, so that the retail sector, the supermarkets, will bring them into the urban dwellers. We have seen examples. For example, in Nigeria, you see cassava now replacing slowly wheat as a gluten-free crop. But also in Ethiopia, when teff is expensive, extremely expensive, then bringing in sorghum and other raw materials. The policies that are important, particularly in POS, it has been mentioned in the morning in terms of increasing the supply through flagship programs, but also creating demand, particularly in school feeding, in public nutrition, and other guidelines. So research on all of this, investment on all of this. Research is still biased towards the major crops, and we need to invest more. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Tilahun, for those remarks. To wrap us up, and before the main program restarts, I'm honored to introduce Dr. Bram Govertz, Director General for CIMMYT, and the 2014 Borlaug Field Award from the World Food Prize for the closing remarks. Dr. Bram, please.
Thank you, Daniela, and Carrie, once again, congratulations for the prize that you will receive tonight. Thank you, everybody, for being here. They're almost, I think, kicking us out of the room, so let me be succinct. As you know the background on VACS. It was launched not so long ago, so we have achieved a lot in a very short time span. And so my job today is to actually summarize what was presented here, and I'm going to try to do that very efficient. Before going there, why would CIMMYT, the Maize and Wheat Improvement Center, be interested in VACS crops? Those that know me a little bit, two characteristics: I'm quite impatient and I want to get stuff done. So if we want resilient and nutritious maize and wheat production crops, we need opportunity crops. That's the reason why we are standing here. And I think Kerry was very clear that what we were trying to do was to catalyze a movement, that the State Department will probably prohibit communities of practice because they overload the system, that we're trying to generate nutrition security, but it shows there is a movement going on. I think you were also very clear that the theory of change needs to project to 2030, 2040, or beyond. So every piece we move needs to project to that common theory of change that we're trying to move forward. And a centerpiece is the farmer and gender, so we can look at those power relations from the get-go to make this a success. Which makes me jump actually to a crime scene where we were called by Lawrence to create integrated value chains. And I don't know when Lawrence was asking for two detectives, what image came to your mind? To my mind came two strong women looking at the crime scene. Because Anna and Daniela have been watching the crime scene carefully and trying to bring us all here together. So I could see Anna and Daniela looking at that crime scene and thinking, what are the motives, what are the means, and what is the opportunity for a value proposition for this value chain, and how do we do R&D along every link? Of course, Martin said we need access to nutrition through diversity, availability, and accessibility. And Maximo, who has been another driver to try to make this work, summarized that if we look at the demand, there's a private sector in different categories: multinational, SMEs, local consumption. And probably we need a plan where we look at what is the demand today, what can the demand be in 5 years, what can it be in 10 years, and how do we prepare today for within 20 years. Empowering farmers and governments requires bold action, and farmers and governments to work together humbly on local initiatives. So it's take opportunity crops to the farmers and take opportunity crops to the consumers. Soil management is locally specific, therefore we need monitoring, applying, and improving through global concepts. And Telehoon brought us back to the essence of where this all started, Africa. Opportunity crops come from Africa. So fauna and flora in Africa actually knows those crops. Whatever the consequences are of that, we need to get back to know these crops and put them back on the plates of the families. In order to do so, we already have made progress, because this is also important to highlight. We started with work on seed systems, and Prasanna is here in the room. And I want to quickly report that 75 partners right now in 6 African countries are already taking those opportunity crops to produce better seed systems together with the Seed Systems Group, NARS, World VACS Scaling Partners. Few numbers: 34 partners from 6 started countries. 37,000 small seed packs were already distributed as we speak. We have nearly 600 demonstration plots by VACS teams installed, 10,700 small farmers trained, and 200 village-based advisors advising on those seed systems. So let that be a proof of concept of one piece of the theory of change. We have started 7 opportunity crop breeding programs on Bambara, finger millet, sesame, pigeon pea, okra, amaranth, and taro. All VACS breeding programs have developed and are refining their work plans, but very uniquely are a combination of capabilities of African-based research centers and taking and leveraging from the international network of breeding that is available. They're therefore led by local African research institutions. In order to make this a success, we need to create critical mass. Critical mass that needs to be based on real understanding of what the product profiles are for the breeding. So not just what we think it should be, but through backfeed, we have set up backfeed systems in order to receive that input, and we have received 4,000 different beneficiaries, farmers' input back in order to drive those breeding programs. A meal system is set up through an online system called e-agrology. At the same time, we are doing the capacity building to anchor locally those breeding programs in order to break the cycle of not enough human capital in order to keep the breeding, the seed systems, the knowledge, the soil knowledge going. So today we are starting a first cohort is launched in order to develop capacities in Africa. So with that, we have designed the plans and we have reported some pieces of the theory of change. The fact that you're still here is because when you leave the room, you're committed to fill in all the different pieces of the theory of change and avoid that we are watching within 5 years another crime scene. Thank you very much.